Hello, and welcome back to Everything is Ideology. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Kaplan, and in today's episode, we have an expansive conversation with Dr. Diyah Larasati, scholar, artist, choreographer, and professor of gender, women, and sexuality studies at the University of Minnesota. We discuss her recently published Train and its fugitive rhythms, rewriting empire, violence, and the politics of sound. We begin by situating her work within the political aftermath of the 1965 Indonesian genocide, an event that remains under-discussed globally despite its scale and its deep entanglement with Cold War politics. But rather than approaching history through a strictly linear or archival lens, Dr. Larasati reframes time itself. She describes her work not as history, but as narration, as something lived, fragmented, embodied, and constantly in motion. From there, our conversation opens into questions of memory and form. What does it mean to write about violence without reproducing it? How do we resist turning trauma into something consumable? Larasati pushes back against what she calls the overproduction of violent narrative, suggesting instead that we must ask why violence happens and how it continues to live within bodies, spaces, and sounds. One of the most striking threads throughout her article is the figure of the train. What begins as a symbol of colonial infrastructure, of extraction, surveillance, and control, quickly becomes something more complex. The train is rhythm, it's memory, it's childhood, it's fear. It's also, paradoxically, a space of possibility, where noise creates cover, where secrecy becomes survival, and where fleeting moments of freedom and communication emerge. We also spend time thinking through feminist methodologies, not as an abstract framework, but as something grounded in lived experiences. Larasati traces this back to her own upbringing, where women negotiated land, labor, and survival within militarized environments. In this context, feminism isn't just a theory, it's knowledge of seasons, of crops, of bodies, of how to speak and when to remain silent. It's a way of navigating power on the most intimate and material levels. Throughout the episode, we return to questions of fugitivity, sound, and theory itself. What does it mean to speak as someone whose experience has historically been spoken for? What role does theory play, not as abstraction, but as language that allows different histories and bodies to enter in the same conversation? If you like what we do here and want to support the show, please consider becoming a member on patreon.com/everythingisideology or follow the show on Instagram at everythingisideology. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Hello and welcome back to Everything is Ideology. Today I'm joined by Dr. Richmani Diyah Larasati of the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Minnesota. She's a passionate dancer, practitioner, innovative choreographer, and author of works such as That Dance That Makes You Vanish. She's explored aesthetics and narrative through numerous writings. As professor of transnationalism and aesthetics at the University of Minnesota, she is also affiliated with American Studies, Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, and advises the Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change. She serves as editor for the upcoming special edition of Lembaran Anthropology, and she is co-editor for Bodies That Haunt. And she currently sits on the editorial board of the Asia Journal of Women's Studies. So thank you so much, Doctor. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm happy we figured out time differences, whatnot, and we were able to sit down and chat. Now, I read this article about 2 to 3 times now, and each time it strikes me as I feel like I kind of get what's going on more. It's sort of like, as you call it in the beginning of the article, you talk about it as a sort of poetics of being. And that struck me as more and more important for grounding the reader in the essay, because it lets the reader know that this is an action, this is a process of memory. There's a lot of the politics of memory, memorialization, what English and language can do and can't do, what sound brings to the fore, how sound and sort of machinery of colonization, such as the train, bring to the fore. And I felt like around the 3rd time I read it, I sort of got what you were trying to do more so, because this is a text that demands maybe 2 to 3 readings, because there's a lot of different moving parts, and perhaps the moving parts is on purpose because, well, it's about the train, and what's a moving part more so than a train, right? And I know you're speaking from a very particular positionality, and you're particularly concerned with the idea of a native informant and native informancy and what that work does and doesn't do. But before we sort of get into the meat and potatoes of the article, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the historical context you're speaking within and about within Indonesia, post genocide memory, and these sorts of things to just acquaint the listener with the historicity of your experience that you're discussing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lee. Really appreciate. Just for the purpose of this conversation, please welcome to call me Dia, my middle name, and also as a signal as a Dia in Indonesian is kind of the non-gender, non-binary, but at the same time also acknowledgement of being, in which you already explained at the beginning. Yes. So thank you very much for this invitation. I feel so pleased to be among you. Um, I also read your work in the jazz studies and thinking about the sound. And as I don't know if you know, I love jazz. And I have couple close friend that I keep talking, and music is a part of our own bodily rhythm. And in spirit of that, I honor your invitation, and this is a part of the the positionality also that I want to honor in this article. Yes, as you mentioned, this work situated within a certain political time as a signal. Again, I must confess, I'm not historian. I'm an artist. I'm, a dancer. I also singing in my own time. So, those are the spirit of the meaning of time in this article. But to honor, to acknowledge a specificity of field, certain reference need to be laid out. So, your first question is asking me to retrace this kind of uh, time as a context. Yeah. So yeah, so this work situated inspired by in conversation with 1965 and after, in which, because in some places the political event continues, and as you yourself in your writing engage with sound time, that sometime we do break, sometime continue. In this writing also I inspired in that conversation. Basically 1965 is where the largest massacre, and in my book I call as a genocide, but at the same time also in conjunction with uh, a time of the global function that the global discourse called Cold War. But in my work, in this particular writing that you read, and I really appreciate you give time to read for the article, the 1965, the genocide, it referred to a political killing that done in Indonesia, and also I think it was the largest genocide in that century, and rarely talked or discussed before in the global discourse of genocide and political violence. And yet there are a couple of scholars that work and dedicate, and they are mostly historian. Before I answer specifically toward my writing, I must acknowledge them that my work in thinking about historical time, I refer to Jeffrey Robinson, Chris Laksana, Vanessa Herman, in which they are centered on specific time period, how the political killing and genocide happened. In my work, though, um, I reverse that kind of time frame. I center on how time being understood by there's a specific place that I mentioned in the book, in my writing, as a kind of site that I remember well. I remember engage, sometime forget, sometime remember, and the time period is uh, I grew up after, not long, but after, because the violence in the area is from 1965 until 72. Still, there is incarceration, there is a murder, there is a kind of public lynching. There is and that is a familiarity of time and context. So the genocide mark uh, politically as a governance of state, post-colonial state, the transition between the first president of Indonesia to the second president of Indonesia that's supported by the U.S. Government. And that is like official document. It's not rumor, it's not gossip, but there is a massive deployment of support from this place. So therefore, the genocide, when I'm talking about, is marking that connection, the time, the intimate time of a family, but also global connection in the world. Is that enough for the cheating?
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think it's just important to situate because, as you say, you sort of hedged your marks by being like, "Well, this is documented. This is real. I'm not just making this stuff up." And unfortunately, that might still be the case because, well, the West, frankly, only sort of declares something a genocide when it's in their own favor, right? So, unfortunately, we still have to say things like, "This happened," and we have to point to like serious scholarship, the Jakarta method, all of these various sort of
Benar.
texts, right? So scholarship, unfortunately, is doing a lot of work that humanitarian agencies should be doing, such as documenting human atrocities and genocide, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's wonderful. I am hesitant to ask you one other question about sort of the historical thing, and it's just because it also it messes with this idea of temporality that they're talking about,
Correct.
because you relay an anecdote, and we'll get into the article more specifically, but you relay an anecdote in the train when you're with several post-colonial notable scholars on a train in China going to Shanghai, and you're thinking about the Bandung spirit and the Bandung conference and tricontinental sort of things, and I was just wondering, what role did the Bandung sort of spirit or conference play within this piece? Or because I found it really interesting. It was there, right? And then that you didn't go back to it, which was part of your project of memory. Um, I feel like that was also very intentionally done, like these various fragments and pieces and stories that were coming to happen, sort of various hauntings and whatnot. I was wondering if you could talk about how the Bandung plays a role here within this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this question. And yeah, those are both my composition, my choreography in writing, but also actually I consciously, unconsciously kind of like, in composition, sometimes we miss a piece of, dedication and commitment, but we know what we want to do, but still the technicality is sometimes is missing. What I try to do there is one, retrace historical kind of alliances between Asia, Africa countries, and as allies, where the political movement were guided by post-colonial and decolonial spirit, and we understand that, and especially you and your work, and I believe the audience of this post, but in that particular Asia Africa conference, my works always retrace through the language of aesthetic collaboration. My mind always depart from that, because that is particularity of promise that I promise in terms of the potential. Because leadership, state leadership, um, you know, the head of military always mostly captured by the figure of man. And that is where my kind of engagement from the feminist perspective, delicately, I try to, engage through the conversation of the figure that is often invisible. So I always trace a song, I always trace a kind of poetry, a dance. And in fact, in my incoming book, Lee, I'm talking about a craft of flower as alliances during this conference that mark both gentle feeling, beauty, but clear in a political commitment. So, because I want to undo violence, and I also want to trace the potential of aesthetic in this context. So, Bandung for me, I have to situate in that, while refer to the meeting, many leadership, post-colonial, and there is also a place that wasn't even independent yet, but they try to figure out what does really mean liberation, right? And again, my work is situated that question of liberation, not only through those figure of the leader, but precisely talking about leadership in different way, in which I place aesthetic practice, and especially by a woman in this conference. The second part of Bandung in this article that I mentioned, and you noticed that very well because the name and thing like that, and I really appreciate you are very detailed composer and listener. I know that. That is a inspired by those Bandung conference. We also have something called Bandung School, in which consists by many cultural studies, artists, and also thinker and activists from the global south, in which those are dedicate time and work toward creation of continuation, a political commitment through our work, through our kind of a public engagement, through a critical theory and dedication to this kind of academic and publication. And nobody's talk about it, but I'm in it. I'm inspired by it. My dedication in my academic, in my journey, also reading and engage with those kind of reading. So I want to acknowledge that this is actually happening. And we have first project was inspired by Kwan Sing book, yeah, and also Kwan Sing intervention actually in giving a space for culture studies in relation with the ground. So the theoretical framing of our work, our creative intervention in terms of theory relate with particularity of dedication, in which potential of collaboration, and we call that Bandung School. And this initiative that at the time were, as you see, so many names were, long established scholar. As at the time, for sure, like I'm a little bit younger, but not much. Inspire me to look at this potential theory and how our engagement still stay ground within that kind of political commitment. That is the Bandung School that I'm talking about. So I'm combining between these two historical events. I must confess that the Bandung conference in Bandung, the first one, were resulted larger connection to biopolitics in Indonesian context. Let me clarify. Many women, many men, many different kind of gender that doesn't mention, the categorization in those places. We don't use, she, he, they. But that particular context were particularly the one that later on being killed in Indonesia, incarcerated. stigmatized, cannot write, cannot publish, cannot dance. So the Bandung is a legacy of global network, inspiration, political commitment were crushed down through the empire operation. And this is never being taught, never being revisited. And my goal was slowly to enter, and I will mention specifically in my incoming book, but it was a very painful, injured, wounded political commitment. And not only that, it's a story about death and incarceration because of political and intellectual and academic commitment.
Thank you so much. And I know that I've seen recently a few people and scholars thinking about the Bandung now and what it means now, specifically like Vijay Prashad at the Tricontinental doing this sort of work. So, I mean, thank you so much for that impassioned remembrance and plea. Violence, unfortunately, plays a role throughout this piece as both like a lingering thing, like a sword sort of constantly above your head, and a sword also perhaps in the body as well in the form of remembrance. And I know you discuss dance a lot. That'd be a very cool sort of thing to perhaps engage in another discussion with, because I could put on my ethnomusicology hat and sort of chat about these things as well. But I was wondering. So you mentioned violence. I was kind of curious about. I have this question. Violence appears throughout your piece in different forms. What role does violence play in shaping your argument and the types of narratives you present, but also the types of violence that make it impossible to present a narrative as well? I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question actually, and I have to be a little bit careful because I also still struggle how to compose or craft or let's say choreograph as a form of hermeneutic in many my work. Um, yeah, some of us born and grew up in a specific site, right? I grew up not far from military training place, um, and yet they have a site or field that using land being rented to the farmer, but at the same time as a training practice, and yet also in the middle of a village or region or couple village. So the not far from that there is at that time there is um a site specific for me in English, I think, where my familiarity to violence is like 24/7, and you have to find a way how to survive, negotiate value to your own self, but at the same time, require safety measurement. And this is, a story about um, uh, militarized village zone, while at the same time is also a production because of agrarian, because agriculture. And yet there is a power structure that measure that connection relationality between renter and the management in which military office. And those are also, you can imagine in this kind of narrative, right? Class, but also identity, gender, and so on. Um, because of that, I train to very vigilant. I train to indirectly as a consequence of this kind of cartography. And but also I am aware, I inspired by Saidiya Hartman critique about um, how the story of violence kind of indirectly not respond to the particularity of memory and certain, uh, like respond toward that particular memory. And that is a community kind of environment, constituent content, but also self, right? Self recognition of what I have been experienced. And for me, dance has been a place of that kind of time graph. But in writing, I want to signal because I want to critique the amount of attention to narrative of violence if we forget to engage with why violence happened, then it's become reporting. And that reporting mode, I believe it is a place where the decolonial method in writing require revisit. And because I'm also in the field of gender studies, and so I want to be careful in talking about it, while at the same time also acknowledge that's happened, and how then the narrative production uh, become kind of a tool to see the potential of not repeatable. Yeah.
In that regard, it's always sort of tricky because it's like you don't want to redo or reenact the violence that occurred, but you do have to speak of it to create some sense of like reclamation or sort of creating even a law case, perhaps as well, should the time occur.
So because require trying in psychological preparedness, right?
Yes.
So how you to be critical while the continuation of certain memory is embodied. And that is the technicality that in writing, especially in culture studies or in thinking about ideology of the body, often we forget how the invisibility of the impact of violence for uh, outsider, while the continuation of remembering it's embodied. And of course, each of us are uh, thinker of self, right? So it's we many of us try to figure out how to get out from this kind of space and side of ourself, right? And in thinking about certain memory of violence, therefore we all have a way and keep looking and keep trying, and yeah, so writing is kind of become a site for me to both speaking back about violence, noticing and analyzing, so that also notice that this is also methodology of speaking.
No, thank you. I mean, it's particularly complicated to navigate because, as you say, you don't want to list these various violences and create almost like you mentioned a pornographic consumption of sort of violence enacted on the feminine identified body. So it is incredibly difficult to do because it's like it's like this deconstructionist method needs to be sort of applied. And that speaking, you sort of recount 2 or 3 times in the piece that you suggest feminist methodologies for approaching these various questions. Can you discuss a little bit about what feminist methodologies offers within this particular context to maybe mitigate some of these systems you're speaking? Yeah.
Thank you. That's really appreciate your kind detailed observation on that. Yeah. So I came from a side and place that actually women are leader in a way that leader of renter to to the military place who ran the land. so that woman can run and plant, let's say, corn, tobacco, and watermelon, and paddy, sometime sugarcane. So the women have knowledge of crops. Yeah, the women have knowledge of land and particularity of season. Let's say they will bargain to. I follow, let's say, my grandma to talk to the military officer and say, no, we want to plant not tobacco this time because it's rainy season, and then the military person will say, it's a high price now. And then she will, this is kind of in and out memoria. I, of course, did not remember any single sentence, but it says, train me to know how we use knowledge in terms of feminist practice, in which engagement of the placement of, we don't call intellectual back then this kind of thinking, but it is like environment politics, right? So that is like, I came from that kind of location. My feminist practices came from the intimacy of struggle, where the negotiation of even like economy, even acknowledgement of voice, even like the braveness walk toward that military office, right? And also negate what to cook today at home, and that is what to cook at home in my village is not form of oppression, it's a form of knowledge, genealogy of like recipe, genealogy of actually woman space to, to talk about that garlic is not supposed to burn or something. That is the feminist epistemology that I'm talking about. Because I came from particular kind of cultural practice, so I mediate two worlds between the traditional feminist practice that, of course, is not called feminist back then, but I want to intervene that particularity of technique and technology, engagement toward biopolitics, toward the relation with a governed land where we live and so on, in fact, require method and thinking about how this narrative, how this resistant resilience and modality of communication become the feminist method.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I mean, it makes me think of the various forms of sort of feminism and where this occurs and why the clashes exist, because there's clearly like a Western sort of bourgeois feminism that would greatly clash with finding sort of self-determination in cooking something from one's own land, because the kitchen in one space represents sort of like a cage, whereas the
Yeah.
kitchen represents for others like a place of love, community, collective ownership of land and farming processes and self-determination practices. So there's clearly different feminisms kind of at play. There's one thing um, that I found so interesting that you mentioned, and I wanted to hear more about. I hope you can help me out here with this. Now, I wrote you reference your earlier work tracing the phenomena of the machine, and we'll talk about this machine. The machine being like the colonial embodiments such as trains, et cetera, et cetera. And you write, the phenomena of the machine is relation to gendered land ownership and straight state discrimination in Indonesia. Although this isn't fully elaborated in the article, would you mind expanding upon this idea, what you're getting at?
Yes. So the village that I'm talking about, like as a site specific of this writing, is kind of split to two sections, separated by train, light rail. Is that the term? Yeah, light rail and river, right? So the river, clearly we understand in environment, in livelihood study, in urban development, will relate with watering rice field, watering a land, and also was my bathroom. Yeah. So this paradox of beauty and violence at the same time, because you bodily expose and thing, will inspire me a lot. How the management of water river through a specific machine that I always ask to my neighbor. I remember, like, what is that in the river? Like, something stuck in the middle, and they say, oh, during old time, the Dutch placed that to make sure the water flow not beyond certain measurement, so that the sugar cane doesn't flood, for example. That kind of oral history. And then the train is the one that very close to this particular writing, in which clearly the presence of train came during the colonial time, and so many studies about that, right? um um but also carry the sugarcane and other crop that the colonial operation mechanism um engage or built or presence there. And then Indonesia, the area, is also not only colonized by Dutch and then later on colonized by Japan. So 3 years only. But this mechanism of trade, the regulation kind of changed little bit, and the reorientation of a function. In this particular writing, that is the colonial logic, yeah, that I'm talking about. And then the post-colonial state embraced that leftover, right, with the thinking that, or the homework to think about how to navigate the trend as a side that function and reroute the colonial logic, but is more in terms of post-colonial protection to their own people, transportation, mediate kind of distribution of food when they are hunger somewhere else, or, a mean of transportation for economic surviveness from that region, because we produce, corn, sugar cane, but also, some craft, right? So that side. And then this particular trend during the genocide, it's become the passing the story from 1965, 72, or during my growing up, around 70, 72. Always there is like people in the window of the train looking at our house or thing, and the rumor, the gossip become, prevalent, that there is someone looking. So it's a state gaze, right? State gaze. And the trend in those kind of places is the rhythm. That's why I put rhythm. Fast, slow, break, sometimes stop, sometimes like sometimes like so the rhythm of trend it's also become childhood obsession for me and my friend to listen, and we put our ear in the it will impossible in the US, but you know I forgot in English the metal side when the train
Tracks.
yeah, the track, and we will put our ear, and then we train. We know, oh, the train is getting closer. Oh, the train's still far away. So we keep playing and things like that. So so there is a variation of utilization of this track and light rail from colonial logic, post-colonial betrayal surveillance, but also a promise of potential training of sound. That is, I think, the part that I'm kind of failed in this article to clarify in a sentence, that proper, but I hope, I promise in the book it will arrive there. But that was my obsession, my inspiration, and I was that particular powerful childhood memory gave me so much strength in thinking and pushing away all kind of sound somehow, and I'm always a little bit breakdown when thinking about it, because it's the beauty of gathering. And that is also, I want to return to your earlier question, that is the feminist methodology that I'm talking about. And returning to that particular time, it's always giving me knowledge about, oh, what happened with so and so? Oh, what happened with so and so? Oh, how then I dedicate to that beautiful sound of, you know, sound of time, and time of sound, that giving me something. And that is also a gift from this kind of reflection. It's a gift for thinking about human. It's a gift thinking about healing. It's a gift thinking about resilience. And it's a psychological, in English we call psychological technicality to resilience. And that particular simple description of memory was, for me, even when I'm writing it, it gave me a strength. It's a potential of gathering. And that is the powerful of remembering a sound in this particular project, despite I still have to remind you about, I'm talking about the machine, I'm talking about the military operation, the helicopter, because it's not far. And then the dam project that happened during my growing up, the displacement, the truck that carries sugar cane. And also, there is a specific not car, a motor bike that I wrote somewhere else in public seminar and the new school about, the surveillance through motorbike, where, the military regional head will keep checking, like, to the woman, what you're doing. Are you leaving from other village? And so there's people every 2 weeks has to report to military office every 2 weeks from 1965 until 89. Every 2 weeks, all the women surround me have to visit the military office to report how, well, I never know in detail their question, but there are maybe some writing out there. Yet that continuing of time while waiting, there when there the children were, practice listening the sound. And that this contradiction of temporality, contradiction value, and it is temporality, but by whom, what, and how, with the cartography of sound that I'm trying to theorize and to think about. And this is, I think, is returning to that particular moment is a gift.
Wow, so many different directions you could go there. Thank you so much for that detailed response to sort of what the imagination can do with one particular potent object. So I know within different traditions, trains sort of represent freedom, right? Within a post-emancipation kind of African American kind of experience, trains are in the blues within male black blues musicians as freedom, but
Yeah.
for female black blues musicians, it's sort of like, it represents a space that they can't go, or it represents like horror because of traveling alone or the dangers of traveling alone, right? There's a lot of stories about sexual assault that have happened on trains and stuff.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
within the South African context, it makes me think of Hugh Masekela talking about trains and different labor regimes, and great musician as well. Also, like, these different sort of obsessions that occur within the colonial context also makes me think of, there's a few different sort of painters and photographers that really, within the Palestine, context, within occupied territories and whatnot, um, become very detail oriented and sort of obsessed with thinking through different guard towers and what the guard towers mean and do. It reminds me a little bit about that, but the train allows for an area of freedom and speculation. So it's sort of interesting because it's like while it regiments sort of labor and gendered values and where to go and how, it also represents a sort of freedom and a way of escaping too. There's this like temporal displacement that you discuss when a train comes by. I was wondering if you could talk about the fugitivity
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
enacted when the train comes, and perhaps what you even mean by sort of fugitivity, and also you mentioned cooptation as well. If you could discuss these 2 things in relation to the train, however you see fit.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. So actually, the keyword in fugitivity I inspired by um, Indonesian author Pramudia Anantatur, super, super, super well-known authorly. It's mm, many publication translated to more than 17 languages, but it was a writing that was taboo banned during I grew up. So I have access to the reading only when or brave to read with comfortably in library, right? Of course, I read before, but like hiding or something like that, and breathing like fast because you can be in jail right away. Uh, but changed tremendously when I have the privilege to study at UCLA, and in the library of that university I read with comfort. And I want to acknowledge that because other friend in Indonesia reading it with, anxiety, you will get shot or you get killed or you put in jail. But for me, that was the same experience. But then when I arrive at UCLA, I have that privilege. And that luxury time provide me to retrace and to revisit the reading. And one of the work was called The Fugitive. And it's kind of um maybe in the US we call Marxian, but I'm not sure if that even what he think about the kind of categorization in ideology or in thought, but it's talking about who, what, and why is called fugitive, and in comparison to who, what, and why someone commit fugitive. So in that writing, I locate two different kind of fugitive. One is, I hope I remember correctly, one is centered on, quote unquote, law level uh, thief event, fugitive that mark a low-level event that can be stealing a cloth, stealing a food, stealing chicken, and you can get beaten up until die. The other side, and there is a Indonesian famous anthropologist. He doesn't write anymore. His name Tegung Santikarma, super well known in Indonesia during my grow up time. He live in the U.S. now, but never write anymore. So broken heart for me. But in his work, he highlights similar notion that when you steal chicken, you got beaten up until die. But the other fugitive that I'm talking in this writing is fugitive of time of livelihood, fugitive of the land, fugitive of the post-colonial liberation, and fugitive of basically the liberation of the body that I'm very still have difficulty to write in some things that I able to defend how non-pornographic or violent. So, I mean, in English, in straightforward word is rape. So, bodily violated event, right? And how the survivor talking about it. So I'm look at fugitive in that sense. So those combination of possession of fugitive marked by class and access, but also the discourse that being produced, nationalized, or globalized in terms of what does really mean fugitive.
That's great. That's super helpful. I also was thinking, in terms of the speculative time you sort of bring up, how the train is both a marker of colonial time, but it also affords itself a place for those sort of like in different villages or aspects to do other things while the train passes. Because, as you say, it creates a sense of noisiness. And this noisiness allows for people to have conversations they couldn't otherwise have.
Yeah,
Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
yeah, yeah. Um, this one also, wow, you got brilliant sight on that detail as things. It was difficult part for me how to frame that. Um, so as I said, I learned a lot of dance training, and also uh talking about that potential of, waiting time when the parent go visit the military office. In that particular noise and conversation and violence, I actually refer to, let's say, secrecy. Secrecy that I'm talking about is little bit different in terms of secret, but also talking about secret, right? Let's say, oh, when the train passing, and then someone will say, "Oh, that military officer passing with that motorbike. Um, stay inside." Like the ice situation right now. Like, stay inside, don't go outside. Or cooking. Let's cook now. Something like that. So that fast conversation, right? And the train is so fast, but at the same time it's so loud because it's only 2 meter, 2-3 meter distance. So it's really close. We are like in the bank of train rack. Yeah. So I don't know if you can imagine. I never see in the US, but I see in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Indonesia. So that, but also talking about in my incoming book, I'm talking about the scream of asking help, in which nobody's here because the train and the perpetrator like to play with that time because nobody's will hear if you ask help. So it's a reference to series, and this is also answer your previous question. But I want to theorize because I don't want to highlight the violence as a form of commodification, and I'm still training, and training is really difficult. That's why I love to theorize, because it gave me a space of that particularity of experience, because I want to engage with the meaning of native informant.
No, that's great. And one thing that I found interesting was when you're thinking about this, you're going over this act of memorization. This piece is a form of memorization and reclamation. Um, it seems like also one thing that's kind of happening is you're thinking about what was it? Oh, what theory offers you? So you're talking about like, what can we talk? Can the person that experienced all of this violence within the colonized territory, can the colonized talk about their own experience in a way that's intelligible to the metropole through academic language? So I was wondering what you meant, what this language of theory offers as a modality of memory, um, that perhaps doesn't it is it like it doesn't do the same violence as listing and doing all of this sort of pornographic commodification of violence? Like, sort of what does theory offer as maybe a site of healing, um, for those that have experienced, genocidal violence?
That is brilliant question, Lee. Thank you. And I don't know if I can answer in a fully because thinking is a process, but I try. Well, the first step is like this: the body that has been spoken for is speaking now. Yes, and because of that, the theory become the grammar, the hermeneutic of this conversation, so that we try to be in the same table. The gathering that inspired by, the listening of the sound, enable me to feel have access to the table so that we can engage in the same level of intelligentsia. And theory offer me the opportunity. And therefore, theorized experience were also technicality toward the creation of discourse, might be still need time, but provide a potential possibility how the colonized spaces and its people engage in the language that the metropole understood. And acknowledgement of their presence, the colonized. So it's kind of a gathering, it's a kind of a table, it's a kind of like, on the table, like our conversation now, so it's on respecting each other and reminding each other. And that is the theory that from experience clearly is different than listing or um uh explaining everything what happened, because that is precisely giving a hold like something, a gap that we are the native informant, but not able to theorize what it is about. So it's a data, it's a politic of data, the data that spoken for, but right now the data is speaking, and we are thinking about conversation, about humanity potential. That is the role of theory.
I love that. That's great. I mean, it also seems to answer Gayatri Spivak's question, right? Can the subaltern speak? And it seems like the answer is a resounding of course, right? Um, Wonderful. And I was kind of curious in lines with thinking about sort of theory and the various interlocutors. I wrote that you engage with a wide range of theorists throughout the piece. Why did you choose these particular thinkers, and what role did they play in shaping your memory? Um, it seems like there's a memory, a
Mm,
story, and then a theorist, which engages sort of potentially also kind of what you're getting at with doing with not collecting and
yeah,
stories of just violence and so
yeah,
on.
yeah. I actually really I love reading. Is my kind of companion of knowledge also, because I feel my time were not properly enough prepare myself in my role and my current role. So those theories that I'm engaged mostly came from a specific site that I have knowledge, a little bit similarity of experience. Not necessary, it will never, because there is a class, there is a caste, there is a gender, there is also nationality, right? But the political commitment, I think, should cross a border, right? Political commitment should erase a border, because particularly border were created through colonial logic and as if the language. So, but at the same time, in thinking about the kind of reference to keep reminding about that colonialization happened, empire continues shape and influence, but in those crack, in those kind of things, there are a thinker that we might engage, but there is a difference because the reference is different. Let's say talking about feminists, the keyword feminist, right? The birth of feminists in the Euro-American context came from, let's say, equal right to workplace. Let's say, yeah, I'm simplifying. Please forgive me, but I'm just using as an example. While in my context, the workplace was translated in a different meaning, embodied in different meaning. And care and love as a new language in the feminists in the West were long established in the woman that I've been since we were born. We taking care, people giving birth to cut the thing has to be witnessed by the gathering of other women. That is a care, but that is like long established. But as you know, in the feminist theory, some of language of care and attention of love is a new genre, because we constitute in the industrialization of side, right? So in thinking about this particular historicity, therefore, I think the reference of theory is really matter for me, because that is particularly there is familiarity, intimacy, and the birth of thinking, right? But I still honor them, I still engage with them, but in supporting my argument, I have to make sure that the theory that I engage is also understand constituent that I'm talking about. So that is kind of, and if I say cross-border, let's say, in thinking about children and poverty line, I will not center my theory on, let's say, a thinker from post-colonial studies who is, let's say, the owner of 1,000-acre land, So it's that. So it's that cross-border meaning is like that. So we assess class, politic, gender, and identity in a very careful constituent of thought. Yeah. So not necessarily fetishization of, a skin color, but it is consciousness of political commitment.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's super helpful. And that's why I think sort of theory, much like you discussed the train as sort of cross-cutting borders, because trains are a sort of colonial technology that has both aspects of sort of like resistance or the possibility of resistance within it, much like sort of like reading has both things. It can indoctrinate and it could help fight and organize and create cross-cultural solidarities, etc. It's an excellent point that you were discussing with feminism. It seems like care during specific segments of like the Western feminist discourse was kind of shooed away because obviously biological essentialism was just like all women can do is care. So this seemed to be something that was reclaimed later on as capitalism made it such that you can't care for anyone except for your boss or something. So the idea of care had to be rethought. But the idea of care and child rearing and child bringing has always been part of Black feminism. I'm just speaking of like there was a taboo of care, I feel like, for sort of white feminist circles, if that makes sense. I know you study this stuff way more than me, but that's a particular sort of feeling I have. I don't know. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I remember I remember one of the writing of Audre Lorde about, Hurricane Hugo generator, Hurricane Hugo. It was like talking about even the care of, uh, a taste of banana will become so in a in that context of hurricane become so urgent in theorizing, in thinking about taste and food. And in that context, Audre Lorde's critique uh, the most common uh, humanitarian language, right? So along, Audre Lorde was already theorizing a care from just banana given by a neighbor, So versus the institutionalized of humanitarian and concerns of like a politic of um institutionalize a care. And in fact, it was, the first care that came were instead bringing gunboat rather than food and blanket. So that was a very powerful acknowledgement of knowledge for me that, oh, there is a similarity cases, and that's why. And yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, also, weirdly enough, the banana plays another significant role within Ghassan Kanafani's writings as well, where the banana, he has his students paint a banana within the Palestinian context. And they're like, they've never seen a banana before and they don't know what a banana is and how to draw it. So then he realized, like, oh, my teaching serves the role of the sort of occupier. I'm teaching them about abstract things. Like, they don't even know what a banana is. And then this banana actually played a really important role in his sort of political
Uh,
development.
uh,
He
uh,
states in, like, several different
uh,
interviews, which is fascinating as well. So, yeah, I mean, these various sort of everyday objects become a site of both epistemological and ontological reflection. And yeah, I mean, as you know, as a scholar of sort of embodiment and aesthetics, this is where our knowledge comes from, is produced and
correct,
reproduced as
correct.
well. Um, so I guess I want to respect your time, of course. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I was wondering if you have anything you want to discuss that we didn't get to, or any closing remarks, or if you want to even discuss a project you're up to. I know it's outside of the purview of this article, but now I really want to hear how this relates to dance in some way. So anything you want to say.
Yeah, since we have been talking about violence and memory, let's talk about dance. So and we can have another conversation, but yeah, like a sound, dance has been a technique that enable me to trace the specificity of memory, but also, as we see so many commodification and co-optation and so on and so on, and we are aware with that kind of thing. But yeah, currently I'm thinking a lot about this particular choreography that dedicate to the early connection between the sound available during the early Bandung, and the potential of the current Bandung. And I'm preparing a dance composition, if choreography seem to beautifully craft, that dedicate to a specific sound and how the embodiment of memory and resistance project within a specific community in East Java. And this work I plan to perform in Kuala Lumpur um, um, this year, if possible. If not next year, those kind of negotiation and time, thing like that, and dedicate to the particularity of vegetation surround light rail. Is that yeah, so the vegetation surround light rail, and this choreography will dedicate to that gathering, the potential of listening in the track, but also the potential of the vegetation as a signal, as a hermeneutic of kind of a woman resistance within the context of authoritarianism and fascism of sound.
That's wonderful. Unfortunately, that is a very prescient subject and project, especially I'm thinking of, I keep hearing about, the Kennedy Center and whatnot, and it closing and all
I
these
know. Yeah.
incredibly important to link these various aesthetic projects with the authoritarian context we're living in. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're living so you we were in Minnesota during the sort of thick of it as well, and you make this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I just published a op-ed published in UK about that particular time. It's really tough time, and now it's even going to airport. Yeah, I'm kind of retrace that particular memory, right? It's so come back. Just imagine, like you want to be far away, you work so hard, and then it return to the specific center. And this is what we call, right, the gift of freedom as a quotation mark, and the gift as a kind of continuously, that is Miming Nguyen word, as a continuously our entanglement with the specificity of how fascism work, and it's globally. It's really painful.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can only imagine. I'm sorry you have to go through this to chase it, and then it sort of is like it's a continual structuring factor within the West. Um, guess we could end it here. I do have more questions, but I could save them for another conversation, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah,
Um,
really, really appreciate this opportunity. And I learned from your question. I learned from my answer. I learned from my remembering you know, how the writing came up and thing like that. So yeah, I really appreciate and thank you for the attention that given to my writing.